look at today's papers. We're joined by foreign policy analyst Thom Woodroofe. Tom, good morning.
Morning, how are you?
Good to see you again. We've been, of course, covering repeatedly the situation in Egypt, and you're looking at that today as well.
Yeah, so let's basically focus on that and then come back to Australia towards the end and look at the levy a little bit. But I've done a little bit of a scan of the papers throughout the Middle East and North Africa, and I want to look at three English newspapers in that region. Firstly, so if we go to the Jordan Times, which is a newspaper published twice weekly, one of which is today, the local protests there are featuring only in the local news. So while Egypt gets some coverage, the protests that have also to some extent been sparked there by Egypt are only getting a little bit of coverage. Next to the Yemen Times, which has also got quite a lot of protests happening, particularly with a lot of resentment for the rulers there in the wake of sort of their assistance with US drone flights in recent years. Again, there's nothing there about local protests, all about Egypt. And then finally to the Sudan Tribune, which is also a daily paper. There's nothing there, even though there's been some massive protests. Yesterday, I believe it was, there's 8,000 protesters out on the streets, and the opposition leader was arrested last week for calling for people to come out. So I guess it gives some indication of the extent to which these local protests sparked elsewhere are not getting coverage in their individual countries as well.
That's intriguing, and we know that so many of these protests have been using social media and online sites, but internet coverage has been shut right down in Egypt. You'd have to wonder what's going on in those particular countries and how those people are managing to mobilise.
That's right, and also fears by those other regimes about the potential domino effect if these protests did explode further into other authoritarian states.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw one Egyptian a local make the comment over the weekend, you know, Facebook sets the date, Twitter organises the logistics, and YouTube shows the world, which I think really does encapsulate how this works. Though I think particularly Twitter is a little bit maybe overstated to some extent in these things, and new social media tends to grasp onto their effects a little bit.
Where it's not been overstated, though, is simply in terms of getting information out. Because
to show us as well.
Absolutely. The best reporters and reporters who I have the greatest amount of trust in are tweeting from their locations repeatedly, and that's
in real time.
And
a lot of
the best way to
there,
get
like
the information.
Nick Kristof from the New York Times, I think, got in last night, and he's now tweeting away. So, yeah, go to Twitter if you want to follow this, absolutely. But one of the most intriguing aspects, I think, of the whole Egypt saga has been the United States' response to it. And the Daily Beast over the weekend published a really nice piece, which is one of the things about diplomacy I find the most interesting, which is sort of how it actually happens in real time. And it's an intriguing story, slightly sort of candid, I guess, about the advisors sitting down trying to work out what to do in the White House late one night, having to pop popcorn because they can't order pizzas anymore because of security risks. But the White House apparently was absolutely convinced that Mubarak would do an LBJ in '68 and announced that he wouldn't run in the future, and then that would ease.
Which still is one potential
True, but then
to achieve the ordered transition that Hillary Clinton's been talking about overnight.
Sure. I mean, I think Clinton's comments overnight were a little bit still ambiguous, and I think when she came out firstly and said what she said, that didn't particularly help the situation. The real question, though, is what can the US do? And I don't think there is much particularly they can do. But the advisors in this story basically decided that at that point it was best that Obama didn't speak to Mubarak purely almost because they were worried that Mubarak would ask for his support and he didn't want to have to say no to him. But then that changed on Friday with the National Security Council meeting that decided, look, you have to say something. So he did. But I'm not convinced that if Mubarak simply said that he would not contest the next election, that is necessarily the going to lead to the resolving of this situation. El Baradei, in my opinion, is not the solution. I think that he would perhaps be a temporary solution, but he's not really connected to the protesters.
He doesn't have widespread support that, say, the Muslim Brotherhood does on the ground there.
Exactly, and that's exactly his problem. He doesn't have street cred. So overnight when he spoke at the square defying the curfew with the protesters, that to some extent will help his cause. But he has lived overseas for the last number of years and isn't directly connected to this very much.
You wanted to look at the Washington Post as well?
Yes, they've got another good piece they published over the weekend, which is slightly controversial, argues effectively Bush's approach to the Arab world was right. It goes back to what you were saying earlier, Michael, about the domino effect in play here to some extent, saying that when democracy or or individuals in countries rise up against authoritarian regimes that will spread across the region. So it is worth a read, though it does encapsulate a lot of that US response stuff we were talking about earlier.
And also Homepage Daily.
Yeah, so Homepage Daily is a student-run newspaper, I believe, around the world. But they have a piece. This is actually quite old. This is from 2009. But I want to give... There's a great quote in here about the person that Mubarak's now appointed as his vice president, Omar Suleiman. Now, Omar is... he was the de facto second in charge anyway, and Mubarak hasn't had a VP, I think, for about 20 years, so it doesn't really change anything anyway. But Mohammed Habib, the Australian, who's obviously was in Guantanamo Bay, in this article is quoted as saying that Suleiman, who at the time was in charge of intelligence, directly interrogated him. And this hasn't been running at all in the Australian newspapers, which is quite surprising. But the quote is, Suleiman slapped Habib's face so hard the blindfold was dislodged, revealing the torturer's identity. To loosen Habib's tongue, Suleiman ordered a guard to murder a gruesomely shackled Turkestan prisoner in front of Habib, and he did so with a vicious karate kick. So when you think that this is now the guy who is potentially going to be the next president, and certainly the next vice president, it gives you some indication that probably this is not going to satisfy the needs of the people, or the wants of the people.
The reporting is sound? Do you have faith in the reporting in that Homepage Daily?
It's something that got a little bit of coverage at the time, but because he was not notable, Omar at the time, not so much. But I think it's just interesting. It's been a bit on Twitter about it. Mark Colvin, for example, has been writing a little bit on it, but nothing that's come in the Australian newspapers. So I would say yes, but it's in Habib's memoirs as well.
Thom Woodroofe, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.